Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepio, Vepio, ho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepio, Vepio, ho. Suukon kirsikka.
Hello, welcome. And we have a special treat today. In fact, it's an interview with a man I've long wanted on this show, Les Bartlett. Les,
hi, Wayne.
Welcome to you.
Thank you.
The audience will know Les already, but I'll say a little bit like we do. You're well known for, I would call you Mr. Cape Ann history. You're embodied the excitement and curiosity of anybody, more than anybody I know, in getting to the root of our history. And this is our joint history in Cape Ann, both Rockport and Gloucester. I don't know if you cross the bridge over into...
I live in Manchester now, so I have to cross the bridge.
You sometime. And he has puppets. And well, let's start with something that we'll be all familiar with, and immediately he can pick up and show you.
So this is a piece of granite. It's New Hampshire granite, right? And my love of photographing granite began in 1985, when my father came back with this piece of granite, and he said, "This is New Hampshire granite. This is our state symbol." Now, I was a Boy Scout, and it was the Jamboree at Valley Forge. And it was a big deal to go for that. And my mother made tie loop, and we glued 147 of these pieces of granite on my tie loops because everybody would swap.
Want to, yes.
Okay? And I went with 147 tie loops, and I came back with 147 tie loops. Because nobody wanted granite. They wanted colorful patches. They wanted color and flair. And that put a question in my mind that's lasted for my life. Of how could it be something that my parents spent so much time and love on to me, have such little result? And how could a state symbol not matter at all? So I've kept this with me as a great reminder. And it took me 40 years of just putting it aside to pick up my camera and start to photograph. And we'll come to some of that in a bit.
Can I hold it?
Sure.
This is granite. In fact, where would Cape Ann be without granite?
Right, exactly.
Quarries, and I'm a fan. We know the Finns basically were drawn to Rockport and Gloucester by granite and working as quarrymen and putting it all together. Where would we be? Where would the Finns be who wanted to settle here and make money and lead and lead a life with a family, leave as descendants without granite? You're all right. And Les many times does speak on the subject of the Finns, and because if you talk about granite, you talk about
the Finns. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So I want to speak from the first image that's on the screen, because
you show the image, and people are seeing some type of a house under construction. Tell us more about that.
So this was and is in Epsom, New Hampshire, which is on Route 4 outside of Concord. It's outside the bedroom community going to Boston, so it's a rural area, bigger than Cape Ann. And in 1947, my dad with his father cut the trees, sawed the trees, lumbered them, let the lumber dry, and my dad and grandfather built this house. This is the house I grew up in. This is a photograph that my mother took as the house was being built.
May I say, this is something really unique to you. I don't know anyone else. Yeah. I've known people who have built their own houses.
Yeah.
Not many, but I have known. Yeah. In this instance, it's not just, it's what you described. Yeah. It's the whole process going from a tree to lumber so that the lumber in the house is actually prepared by your family.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the family lived on a 400-acre working farm that had been there for over 300 years. And I was born into an environment that was dying. We had one cow that my father and brother took care of. And even as a kid, I knew that this community was dying. This way of life was passed. We still had to keep the fields open, still had the hay, still had to mark out the cow, still had to do the things, but it was one cow. I think that's been part of my fascination with Cape Ann history, was to realize the importance of staying connected to roots. You know, I mean, we didn't have a garbage pickup. We had a dump that we took stuff to.
Well, when you're speaking of something dynamic, in other words, something rise and fall,
Yes.
where there's a economic and social group that later just diminishes gradually.
They're gone.
till
It's just the
it's
whole
gone.
cycle of farming and old home days and communities goes down the drain.
Which reminds me, I have to ask you,
Okay.
you've spoken on the topic, Dogtown.
Okay? So what does it remind you of?
Dogtown,
Dr.
Carmen.
Well, actually, it's really interesting. We're going to get more to Dogtown later.
We'll do it later.
Okay, we'll do it
But
later. We'll hold that thought.
I've got
Okay.
to ask you to,
Yeah. Move
in,
along?
in the order in which you
Good.
wish to, you might want to move on.
Good,
to
thank
the
you.
Next,
I'm ready to move on here to
Do
the
it.
next slide. I'm going to move on. Because after I left the farm life, I ended up for 30 years of my life living and performing with the magic company in Beverly, Legrand David and his own spectacular magic company. And it was while being backstage that I learned about the light and how light would affect photography. It's very much influenced my life. The amazing thing here is that this is a moment where I've walked. It's the end of the show. The magician has come. He's about to shoot 2 flags out into the audience, and I'm standing behind him, and nobody sees me on stage because they're all looking at him. It's a great, great learning, great lesson.
so in an incidental, highly educational moment,
Yeah.
you picked up that you could be fully present on a
Yeah.
stage,
Yeah.
essentially almost center stage,
Better stage,
and
really.
you are invisible by the way that people's attention is drawn.
That is correct. Your
to
attention
the-
was drawn to him.
Yes.
Yeah. That was pretty amazing. It was
So
really
anybody
amazing.
who's attended through those decades
Yeah.
in Beverly the
would know that
magic
this
show
is Marco the
would-
Magi,
would
Yeah.
know this scene
this scene.
that concludes the
Yeah.
show. Okay.
Let me go on to the next slide. Okay. This gets at the first great passion of Cape Ann for me, which dealt with the motif number 1. And I'm sure everyone can recognize the red float, the red motif. And in 1933, the Legion and artists decided that they wanted to build a float to take to the Chicago World's Fair. And they built it in Rockport. I need to show here if I can. Yeah, great.
Beautiful.
This shows you the float in
Yeah.
Rockport at Dock Square at night with spotlights, fully set up. And this was the day before they drove it by day, with Jimmy Quinn as the chief of police on a motorcycle.
While you're still in Rockport, I got to ask you, I think there was an artist well known to some people who are watching named Aldro Hibbert.
Correct.
And he had something to do with supervising and
He
making this,
helped design it.
helped design this float.
The significant thing, to come back to the float itself, and I did a colorization of from a postcard
Beautiful.
of this.
All right.
Aldro Timi did the wainscoting down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you can see. And they did such a great job, they decided not to cut headlight holes in the front, and they drove it only by day from Rockport to Chicago.
Yeah.
There was no road test. They just did it.
Now, I've got to ask you, this is 1933.
Yeah.
How about the interstate? How did you travel from
They traveled-
Rockport to Chicago
They
in
took the
1933?
Lincoln Highway. It was only the Lincoln Highway. That
The
was
Lincoln
it.
Highway.
Yeah, had just been opened.
And you said they traveled by day.
Only by day. At night, they
And
would
did they
set
have-
up as they did here.
Who
Sorry.
helped them through the traffic? And
Jimmy
areas?
Quinn, the police officer, would be deputized in each town so they could drive the float through without stopping.
What was Jimmy Quinn riding or driving?
A motorcycle. He set the
Motorcycle.
world's record for the longest motorcycle ride at that time.
He had the world's record for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
most miles on a motorcycle. And
Mhm.
what did they do? Sleep on the road or what?
So if you look at this, in the body of the motif, they had bunk beds. And that lasted for one night. And they realized then the fumes from the engine was just so overwhelming. They just camped out or they stopped they had set up to go with either people who were from Rockport or who summered in Rockport at their houses. Okay? And they would pass out information on Rockport. They had a whole brochure on it. So
Well,
they go to...
you got to respect that. The 1933 is the low tide economically in this country. The worst part of the Depression, 1933, most unemployment, and how do you reclaim Rockport as a viable economic entity unless you go around producing these brochures and going through the country.
The amazing thing
why
is,
were they going to Chicago?
The Chicago World's Fair had a parade for floats, and there was to be a competition for the best float, with 200 floats in the parade. Most of them were reproductions of locomotives from World War I that transported troops in Europe. You have to remember that the biggest political action group was the American Legion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? 9,000 legionnaires went from Massachusetts.
Okay.
But the brochure and the ads in it were from business people in Rockport. And you're right, it was the depths of the Depression. Tiny ads that people saying, good luck, come to Rockport. They really wanted to promote and attract people to Rockport.
When the float got into the parade in Chicago, what happened?
So they lined up the day of the parade at 10:30 in the morning in downtown Chicago. They didn't move until 4:30 in the afternoon. There were 160,000 people in the parade.
I hope they had a bathroom break.
So then, when they were at Wrigley Soldiers Field, they went outside downtown Chicago, out around to the Soldiers Field.
Okay.
When they get into Soldiers Field, they got a standing ovation from the audience. Okay. Yeah. And there is a
this particular float attracted enough people that they gave us.
Well, take a look at it. It was an artistic representation of a seaside village. It was perfect. Yeah. The picture up at the top that shows the seagulls flying.
Yeah.
Okay? So it was a juried panel that would vote on who was going to win. There was nothing like this. Okay. With people walking on the ground, you would think this was full size. It was only about 8 feet in height. It was small. So in fact, Gloucester contributed. Gloucester contributed the 27-foot bus chassis for it. They gave it to Rockport, and the whole thing was built at Waddell's boatyard.
So this was built on a bus chassis?
Well, they built it and then they dropped it onto the bus chassis.
Okay.
And the mind-blowing thing of driving it for a week is they only tested it by driving it onto the end of Bearskin Neck. Okay?
And the road test was about half a mile.
Half a mile, yeah. They had a lot of luck. Okay. So it was.
But the jury
panel chose this to be the winning float.
The winning.
It won.
Out of 200.
Won a trophy.
Number one.
Number one.
Motif number one.
They were told the next day
Yes.
that they could parade around on the parade grounds of the World's Fair. They said, no, we got to get back and go to work. So they drove it back directly, and it fell apart, basically.
It fell apart on the road back home.
No, they made it back to Rockport, but they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
It just
So
fell apart.
we can't say go to see it in the
No.
Cape Ann
The
Museum
only
or
thing
anything.
left at the San Diego Historical Society is one of the tiny seagulls at the
One
top.
of those seagulls is left.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Nicely done.
So let's
Thank
go
you.
to the next slide.
Let's move
But
on.
I should say, for 26 years, I've told this story every year.
I'm delighted.
Yeah.
Thank you for the
Yeah.
people who haven't heard it before. Okay.
So this we chose this for a couple of reasons. This is from
Before more.
Okay.
Where is this a painting, a photo, or what is
this
it?
is a photograph.
Who took that photograph?
I took this photograph.
You?
I did. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Go on.
This was in the my show at the Cape Ann Museum in 2007, 2008. It's from Rockport.
I think they gave you the whole gallery.
They gave me the
is it?
top floor in there.
The entire gallery, and you
In
had
the main gallery. Yeah. It was.
how many exhibits did you have there?
I had 48 pictures up.
on that
exhibit,
wall
yeah.
all around, and this was one of them.
This is one of them.
Okay.
This is also in the Rockport Art Association museum collection.
Yeah.
When it came to the Rockport Museum jurying group, and they voted on it, they said, this is one of the finest watercolors we've ever seen.
I was thinking it
Yeah,
looked
yeah.
to me like a.
Yeah.
I think people out in the TV land are going to look at that and say that's a watercolor.
Now,
Beautiful.
this has a double stature to it. In 2011, the New York Times had a competition worldwide they agreed that on a certain day at 11 o'clock in the morning, you had to take a picture where you were and send it in. Okay, and then they would put it online. It was a mapping sort of thing, and this was accepted in. Okay,
So you took this at a particular time on a
at
particular
11
day
o'clock. Yeah,
to send it in
I
to
think
the
it was
New
November
York Times.
2011.
New York Times.
The other thing is this: the trail around the quarry goes along the top edge of the quarry. Okay?
All right.
To get down into here is a good 15 to 20 minute climb. It's not easy. It's off the beaten path. It's what the quarry looked like at the moment that it closed in 1930. The holes, the drills, everything that's there is exactly as it was left because it's not on a common path. Okay?
So this part of the quarry is as if the workmen were there yesterday and
They were.
didn't come back
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, and they didn't make it back.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Okay.
Next picture. Okay, so I'm known for my quarry photograph. This particular piece of work, I call it ecclesia, which is very close to, people think it means church or ecclesiastical. Really doesn't mean that. It means come to the safety of the rock. Come and be safe here in this area. This was first shown at Gordon College at the Barrington Arts Center in 2015. Okay? It's 9 feet by 30 feet.
Now, you forgive
pins.
me for asking, but people out there might have the same question. This looks like, to me, a composite or a double exposure or multiple exposure. What is it actually as a photograph?
So this is taken in August, a very dry August. So there's still vegetation on the wall. Normally, this would have been in November, and in November, the vegetation would have fallen off. It would have been more sallow or less colored, less. Can I kill this? I have to kill it. Sorry, people, it's the technology.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, okay. This is a panoramic photograph of a quarry wall. Okay. As the quarry appeared.
To finish off an answer to my question, I think you implied it, is that this was a single exposure, a regular photograph.
That's correct.
Just a single moment, bing.
It's
and
also
not double exposure.
The bing comes. I'd been going to this wall for 15 years.
Okay.
And the wall literally said to me, okay, this is for you today. This is the only moment I'm going to look like this. You can come back tomorrow, keep coming. This is it. And so I took multiple panels and stitched them together.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's actually multiple panels, but of the same wall on the same day. In fact,
at the same moment.
Basically the same moment. Yes.
Yeah. There are 12 panels here, printed in Gloucester.
So moving on to the next slide, I think you can show us that it's beautiful.
So I'm going to go back. I took these panels, and you can see the edging in here of each panel.
Yeah.
They're not framed, they're not under glass. Each panel is 30 inches by 9 feet. And so putting that under glass would be a prohibitive expense.
Why is it so white?
Why is it so white?
Yeah.
It was the particular coloration of the surface at that moment. You can see it through there.
It's not frost or snow.
No.
Somehow the light that day
and
reflected back.
the temperature, the modeling by the mineralization, by the water.
Yes.
Okay.
Which quarry is this?
This is flat. So this is 5 minutes. If you know where the Keystone Bridge is in Rockport,
yes,
it's off the Keystone Bridge, 5 minutes.
All right.
So I chose to have this. You can see the white at the top, 2 inches on the white and white at the bottom. So it could be hung with thumbtacks, staples, push pins.
Yeah.
That's the way it's hung. It's a very humble hanging.
Where is this?
This was in Barrie, Vermont.
Yeah.
At the Vermont Granite Museum.
Okay.
You can see the wall behind. It's kind of rustic.
Yeah.
And they needed to put tar paper outside the wall. They ran out of money to finish the wall. And so this provided them with a great coverage for 2 years. pre-COVID.
So they kept this up
Yeah, for 2 years.
in that.
Well, we took it
yeah.
down in the wintertime because they're closed in the winter. Okay, yeah.
But when they were open, this was already,
yeah.
this was essentially, they don't call themselves the Granite State, but this was a wonderful depiction of the
Well, Barry, Barry looks upon us as being flatland. Okay.
flatland.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barry, Vermont, where they have more marble than granite, right?
It's both.
It's
What
both
they
up
have
there?
is they have a type of marble that's very different than this marble.
Yes.
Okay, a granite rather. They have a type of granite that is very solid, and when they want to make statue, they go use Barry granite
All right.
because it won't break.
This is a beautiful
Yeah.
example of the popularity of your photograph.
And
And-
this piece has been very serviceable. It's gone to the New England Synod from the
Yes.
Lutheran Church
Yes.
in Lanesville out to Worcester, Mass.
Yes.
For the selection of the bishop. It's been to the Lutheran Church in Lanesville, installed as a screen during COVID.
Yes.
It's been to the Rockport Art Association,
Yes.
and it's going back up to the Vermont Granite Museum next spring,
All right.
the same print. I'm going to show you the next piece. Oh, this is good. Now we come to Dogtown. And I don't remember your question from the beginning.
Well,
of
we
the-
will start with the Dogtown.
Okay.
This is, I think, one of the very first illustrations
Yeah.
in any kind of a national periodical.
Yeah.
Where the magazine ran this illustration, this image, in, I think you told me the year 1851.
Yeah, so this is, I found a slide
Yes?
by a Cape Ann historian named William Hoyt, and the slide was this, and it said, Dogtown.
So, I mean, if I was asking you, and I
Yeah.
think there's people out there interested, say, does anybody know when the first time was that anybody nationally made
Yeah.
a point that there was such a place as Dogtown and took a picture, although it wouldn't be a photograph in
Right.
those days, and put the picture out as
Yeah.
this is Dogtown.
Yeah, this is
Right?
it. This is the
This
one.
is the one.
Yeah.
This is ground zero of
This is
all those
pretty close to
pictures,
it.
paintings,
It's
images
accurate.
of Dogtown.
It's from, excuse me, Peterson's Pictorial Drawing Room Companion. So I took the
What a
slide,
name.
and he had put the quote, Peterson's, and I went into the volume online in the internet, and through archive.org, I found a copy. I've not yet got an original copy of Volume 1, but I have this, and I've been using this, and I think this is timeless. This is the oldest recorded piece that I know of. Okay?
I think you can analyze this for us
I'd love
better
to.
than anybody
Okay?
to tell us what it shows, because to me, there's some rock. But
Okay.
there's more than that.
There's
Tell
much
us
more than that in here. So the first thing is the two boys down here in the corner. It's sort of like two local kids saying, well, what's this all about? Or how are we going to spend our day? What is this? And they're kind of hidden away from it. They're observing. And I think that's a real literary conceit. There's a later photograph from 1919 that shows similar kids hiding behind a house, looking in Dogtown at a wolf walking down the street. Okay?
Like Tom and Huck looking for adventures.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, or just out on the day. So the second thing that's significant is just the whole terrain. We can't really say what view we're looking at. Are we looking at, from Lanesville across the Cape? Are we looking from Rockport across the Cape? Are we looking from Gloucester back toward Lanes Cove? It's a generalized presentation of boulders all over the place. And that was very common at that time, Cape Ann, because people didn't know. Dogtown had been abandoned since 1840. So this is 11 years later, 1840 to 1851. And people are kind of scratching their heads. They're just wanting to leave Dogtown off the picture. Ultimately, Gloucester says, yeah, well, Dogtown kids are like people from a bad part of town. The second thing that's of great interest to me are these wagons, okay, in the middle. This for me indicates, particularly the one on the left, more of commerce moving across the Cape. I mean, and it was traditional for people to be able to go from the Lanes Cove side over to the Gloucester unhindered.
Let me just focus on that
Yeah.
and invite people's attention. The smaller wagon on the
Right.
on the right. Arguably, there's some kind of a horsewhip
Yep.
and one horse.
Yep.
Arguably, that's just a passenger carriage and
Right.
people getting around town. But the left hand, is that 4 horses or at least 2?
At
No,
least
it's
two.
I think it's a
That's
team.
a good
2
question.
teams.
Yeah, I think it's 2.
I think it's 2 teams.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's
Right.
2 teams.
Yep.
And that's 4 horses hauling a large wagon, which you can say this person is bringing cargo, some kind of a goods and supply.
Yep.
In the same way we have
Yeah.
trucks today,
Yeah.
hauling things around from city to city. So this illustrates what you just said, a commercial aspect to Dogtown Common.
You know, we now are so poor in what we know about our thinking for Dogtown. We walk it, we talk it.
I'm going to interrupt because
Okay.
you get a wonderful. You got a presentation. You told me it was a 5-part presentation. He's broken down Dogtown Common, coming and going. 5-part presentation on Dogtown, and the motto is
Walk the walk and talk the talk.
yeah. And
Yeah.
we've all walked in Dogtown Common. We know what that means. Walk the walk and talk. Go ahead. Brother.
Yeah, so I'm going to finish back to the economic side here of a merchant is that we have at Sandy Bay a 2.5-inch pewter sundial that was dug out from one of the cellars. And it's dated as 1750. And it's dated as coming from a man named Josiah Miller, who was the son of a Miller family in Rhode Island that made molds for buttons. They made pewter sundials. And when I saw it, I said, how did he negotiate the I mean, what did he do? He didn't just come all the way from Rhode Island. He was a tinker. He was a traveler. He went through New England. The economic side is why Charles Olson says, my biggest problem is I have no way to talk to you about these people. The people who were there. I mean, you could talk about James Mary killing the bull. There are many things you can talk about. But he's concerned about these kinds of people.
The day-to-day. Well, in this instance, you have, rightly, I think, picked up on something. If you discover an artifact in Dogtown Common, now abandoned, and I think you told me the last people that ever lived in Dogtown Common was one family or one man in 1840? 1840.
Yeah.
So there's nothing out there in Dogtown Common for residential people after 1840. And all of these things mostly are from the 1700s. When somebody finds a sundial from 1750, it has a history. Because the sundial
That's correct.
wasn't born, if you want to call it,
No.
in Dogtown Common or made in Dogtown Common.
No.
Somebody came a distance, some peddler, as you might describe it, knocking on the door someday and saying, what can I sell you? I have buttons.
Or what can I
have
trade?
this.
Yeah.
Or what can I trade? Because typically it was absence of coins and dollars.
Yeah.
But what can I trade? I have buttons, I have combs, I have this. And somebody says, I think that sundial looks good to me. I'll get a sundial. They want to know what time it is.
Yeah.
I mean, almost say, what do you care what time it is in Dogtown Common?
Well,
it's not like you're going to be late for work.
No.
It's like, but anyway, somebody had the idle leisure idea of a grand working device called a sundial.
Where the prestige or the wealth or the wish to,
as it's pewter, pewter, and they purchase or barter, trade for the sundial, which was made in Rhode Island, brought up by this peddler or some agent or other to them, and they have it, and they install it, and then it's not valued so much by the time the place is abandoned that it's left behind. It's left behind in Dogtown Common.
And it's
who needs a pewter sundial when you have watches by then, probably.
Well, that's
anyway.
And actually, museums in New York have samples, perfect samples of the sundial. The one that we have is broken.
Of course, it'd be broken.
So that's interesting.
In that context, you have a wonderful. When you've been the talks Les has been giving about Dogtown, as you mentioned, 5. You divided up I'm going to ask you a fragment of what
Okay.
you know, which was that Dogtown had a rise and a fall economically.
Oh, yes, that's where we
Who was-
started.
Who
Okay.
was
Okay.
living there first, and who ultimately lived there? Or
Let me make one more comment on this picture, and then
Yes.
I'll talk to you. So it's
show these people.
people. These are people in fine dress. They're not fishermen. They're not farmers.
Is that realistic?
You mean clothing-wise?
I mean, realistic for them to be walking in the mud.
Sure, because it was a novelty for summer gentry, summer people to come to Cape Ann and go up into Dogtown,
All right. Even
Okay.
as today. Okay.
even as today. I mean, this is 1851. There's a
Yeah.
wonderful article called My Pitcher Plant
Mhm.
in 1880s of a woman from Boston taking her husband up into Dogtown looking for a pitcher plant that she wanted to dig
There
up.
it is. There it is.
And
But
there it is.
the history of Dogtown
Yeah.
Common, which
Okay,
you know
so-
intimately, you got to share with us that
All right.
part of rich and
So-
poor and the divisions of Dogtown Common.
All right. Originally, we know that the coast of Gloucester and Cape Ann was settled by the fishing. And fishing became the huge job, huge occupation
Good place to live when you're a fisherman is
on the shore,
right on the shore.
near the boat. Okay?
But
But poor people who were fleeing England and persecution came to Cape Ann thinking they were going to find huge inland pasture, meaning lots of grass, easy to work, and that's not what Dogtown was at all. So there was a great friction set up between fishing and farming. As pirating and privateering diminished along the coast, and it became safer to live on the coast, the more wealthy people who had gone to Dogtown, because at a certain point there just wasn't any place to live. So some wealthy people who moved into Dogtown, and we know this from some of the artifacts that are left over of what they had, they were wealthy.
such as Tudor sundials.
Tudor sundials, yeah, or packets of pins,
Yeah.
brass pins.
Somebody discovered some pins.
No, yeah, we have them.
Yeah,
They are
yeah.
packets, and they have no heads. In America, you couldn't put heads to stand the pins. They come from England.
Okay.
Okay. So by 1733, the wealthy people of Dogtown stage a coup. And they say to the Gloucester and to the Commonwealth, we don't want to have to walk all the way back to Riverdale. And they've been drinking at the Grand Ellery House. We'll build you a church on Middle Street. Okay, at our own expense, we'll build a church.
I understand with your own hands, you saw the original actual document. That
Yeah. So the proposal for that is in the Gloucester City Archive, in a bound volume here in Gloucester City Archives. And it's beautiful penmanship. I actually went at one point and took a scan of it. Okay? That's 1733.
And this is a request to make a new church downtown.
Yeah.
With their intention that they would live
Bring the
here.
minister back from Riverdale.
Yes.
Okay. The poorer people in Dogtown say, wait a minute, we can't. We don't have horses and wagons to go because it's an extra mile and a half from Riverdale. Down. We can't. We don't have the wagons. We mostly have to walk barefoot because typically they would have one pair of shoes and they'd only put it on when they went inside the church and took it off. We just can't do this. Those petitions that were recorded, those records are no longer on Cape Ann, or they fled Cape Ann.
They haven't vanished. They weren't destroyed. But where did you find them?
I found them in Irving, reference to it in Irving Sujalecki, who was an archaeologist who came into Dogtown in the 1990s, and he found at UMass Amherst.
UMass Amherst.
Yeah.
Has the survey. Well, tell me what
So
about survey.
what happened was, so the wealthy say, we don't want to be here anymore, and they have to make a decision. The Commonwealth sends out surveyors, and the surveyors take 7 years to measure using what was called a Gunter chain. And the Gunter chain was 100 steel links that would measure 66 feet. And it had
What was the advantage of steel links instead of a longer pole or something.
The poles were wood. They weren't always the same. This was the predecessor to a steel table.
Okay.
Also,
Flexible.
was flexible. It could go around corners and up and down hills.
Okay.
Because they could put in pegs as well to measure.
And it does sound like government work. 7 years.
7 years, and they come down in favor of the wealthy. All right.
They say it's doable.
It's doable. We can do it.
You could walk from.
Yeah, we can do it.
Yeah.
We don't care. This is
Yeah.
pre-revolution even.
Yes.
They're doing this. Okay. All of this lays the groundwork for the women to be left in Dogtown after the revolution. Okay. And even though people say, well, Dogtown comes from the dogs that the women had to protect themselves, I, in my photography, poetic side, say, I think it was the kids having hungry bellies because they couldn't get enough food to cook.
It wasn't the dogs, it was the kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful recollections that are backed up by the research that you've done. And I'm delighted to see it also in an image here on the screen. But I've got to ask you then, in terms of something surreal, not surreal, the thing that we all want to know about, witches in Dogtown Common. Tell us about witches.
Witches?
Tell us about Tammy.
So, tell us about Tammy. So, there are a number of rabbit holes beyond the cellar holes of Dogtown Common. There are rabbit holes you go down. So I went down to, when's the first time Dogtown was mentioned? When did witches come into being? And the first written record that I found was from 1846, when a humorist named Francis de Ravage writes, I was going through Cape Ann and Pigeon Cove, and I came to Dogtown, which has been left to the dignity of witches. And that struck me, there's a joke in his saying that.
There's a joke.
There's a joke there. Then I did some more research. And a year ago, I did the Things That Go Bump in the Night for Gloucester Fishing. And I chose to tell the story of Tammy the Younger, who's known as being one of the bigger witches. But all she was a widow. It was in, before the revolution, we'd be guys, we'd go out fishing. And we come back and I'd say, gee, Wayne, I need a couple of pounds of fish. I'd take them home for the missus to cook. Yeah, okay, just take it. That happened as a matter of course.
Now, these are days widows didn't have Social Security.
No.
Or government checks.
And
or
no food stamps, none of that kind of stuff.
So she went down, essentially.
So Tammy, this is before the revolution. The men would go to ships. After the revolution, when a lot of the men don't come back, Ebenezer Poole from Rockport writes in his journals in 1783, early 1780s. He says, the widows would come out of Dogtown. Here's one story. And he says, Tammy the Younger came down through Cherry Street, through Middle Street, to the wharf. And she walks, now she's gone barefoot, torn skirt. And she comes up to James Poole, who is dressing fish, cutting fish up for local sale.
Fresh fish.
Fresh fish.
As opposed to salt fish.
Yeah. And she says, please give me some fish. Okay? And the world intrudes.
No, Tammy, the curse of Tammy.
Curse of Tammy. And so James doesn't look up from cutting fish, and he says, get out of here, you old witch.
Yes.
And she says,
now this is written in...
Oh, it's in Ebenezer Poole's handwriting.
In 1780 something?
1787, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And he says, get out of here, you old witch. And she wags her finger at him and says, if you don't do it, you don't give me fish, something's going to happen to you. Now, I've been telling all the time, that's a very general statement. Something's going to happen to us after this, right? Something's going to happen with the phone. So she leaves, and James goes out with his boat, good fishing on the Great Banks, has a full catch, and his anchor breaks. And he beats it back to Gloucester Harbor to get the anchor replaced. And he says to his men, boys, always give her fish. Next time she comes back, don't say a word, just give her fish, all right? Because who knows? And Tammy comes back, and James Poole greets her with an armful of fish. Okay? Well, I find that this is written, late 19th century. And nobody speaks to it. I mean, Roger Babson says that if Tammy the Younger was alive today, or in his time, she'd be a politician. She'd be a state leader, head of state. So I think it's a real male thing to create the whole mythos of the witches. Many people ascribe to it. Yeah.
Well, tying it into what you said earlier about the dogs and the kids, who's hungry? I mean, Tammy is getting fish, but not necessarily only for herself.
No, that's the whole thing. You've identified a very key point here, which is it was neighborly. It was houses next to houses. People walked around to everything. You'd be cooking for the house next door.
So if I may, understanding Cherry Street and further back in Dogtown, Cherry Street, Tammy, might effectively be the closest place.
It could have been, yeah. Good point. That's a good point.
They could either walk the whole distance, 2 miles, to the harbor, or they could walk 1 mile to Tammy if they needed something, fish or whatever.
I have to give you another point, which is
wasn't there a picture or an image you saw? Who was it? Elliot Rogers or somebody had an image.
Oh, yes. So Elliot Rogers, who was known as the mayor of Dogtown because he lived on Cherry Street and was in Dogtown every day for 60 years, knew every plant. Okay? He knew over 500 individual plants. A botanist. There's an article in the Cape Ann Sun, 1953, him talking about botany in Dogtown. And there's a photograph of a painting. I forget her name. I want to say her name is Harriet Preston. That's not it. And it looks like a very conventional type of landscape in color. And then in white, she's done the frame of a house with a woman leaning out, pointing at someone driving by with an ox cart. It's the big myth of Tammy saying, if you don't give me fish now, you can't go by. I'm going to curse you. Right?
Yes.
So again, this is very close to the pewter sundial. Like, well, what was the real language? What was really being spoken? What was going back and forth? Okay? I mean, we can say gypsies and Romany people came in. We don't know how they spoke. In 1893, there is an essay in the Essex Institute book, which is online, by Helen Mansfield called Essex County Dialects. She was from the American Linguistic Society, and she was studying how words came in with the English in the 1600s and then got changed when the Dutch and all the different things come in. And at the very end, she says, and then there's this strange word called Dogtown. She says, and I'm really not sure what it's about or what its origin is. And she says, it's not the only Dogtown. There's one in Newbury. So I looked and found a book by a nonagenarian written in Newburyport. She writes in 1893 of what the preceding 100 years were like. And she says, in the summer, for fun, the farmers would go out and get the salt marsh hay. And they would get the help of the men who lived up behind Town Hill in Newbury in the district called Dogtown. And there's an accounting then of how the men told stories. So I have a little dog here. It's like, there is an Aesop's fable of the dog in the manger and the cow. The cow comes in for the field and wants to eat, right? And here's all the hay, and the dog is barking, woof, woof, and growling and won't let the cow get food. And the cow starves to death. And it's my observation, I've gone into these deep rabbit holes, that much of what we approach Dogtown from is from a very fixed view. My Dogtown, and I want it to be this way, was the heart of Cape Ann. To go back to what you said about the up and down, it was Roger Babson who in September of 1927 went before the Gloucester Rotary. Now, in these days, if you're the speaker, you get maybe 10 minutes. It's to the point. Babson took an hour and a half, right? And he laid it out. He said, he gave a long talk. The whole talk was on Dogtown. Okay? And he said, maybe some of you can make a 1-year plan. Maybe some can make a 5-year plan. 10-year, 50-year. I want to talk to you about a 350-year business cycle, and it's called Dogtown. And he laid out the ups and downs of Dogtown and what it was like. It was a great hobby that he had. It was his hobby.
Magnificent. I mean, Dogtown has mysteries and and answers sometimes. With a lot of research and digging, you can obtain it. And then literally, the cellar holes. You
Yeah,
can
the problem now with the cellar holes is they're pretty filled in.
Yeah.
I quite frankly don't even know what the protocol or what legitimacy of going to dig in a cellar hole would be.
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to miss it. Next to you, the whole time you've been talking,
Yeah.
tell us more.
So one of the things I did at the Cabot was I juggled a lot.
You juggled?
I juggled. I did lights and sound.
Lights and sound?
I was dressed as a jester.
Yes.
And I had a great puppet.
And you have a puppet that's sort of a jester.
Sort of. Yes, this is a very funny one because he's got his own puppet.
Hey, look.
Of course.
Hey, I hope you're getting this on the camera. That's excellent. Yeah. Now, did this puppet
I would walk
talk?
around with him. No.
Or
No.
you had it
This is just
gestures?
a walk around puppet.
Gestures and
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you happen in the course of years give a name to this puppet?
Not to this one. Maybe the Jolly Jester.
Jolly
Yeah.
Jester.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
In
was
any
very
case,
jester-like experience.
I like it. The way it's very graceful.
Yeah.
Now, gotta ask, how do you get a puppet? How do you manufacture it? Or
Well,
what?
this one came. There was a lady, I don't know if she's still alive, who lived up in the Newburyport area, who made puppets like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
and
job.
this was sitting there when I got in the car. It said, "Come back and bring me along."
Yeah. Bring it
Yeah.
home. We've talked a lot about Dogtown. And this is a Cape Ann TV
Yep.
station.
Mhm.
You have, besides the motif number one story,
Several
I'm
topics.
sure,
Yeah.
a million topics about
Mhm.
Rockport. And I'd like to get into Rockport because Rockport's been scanted this show and it's a Cape Ann show.
Well,
Tell us more about
okay,
Rockport.
I can
and
tell you a
Rockport's-
topic that covers all of Cape Ann and focuses on rock. It has to deal with America coming into the 20th century. It has to do with what's called the American pageant. Okay? And the American pageant begins in 1905 in Cornish, New Hampshire, at Augusta St. Gaudens property, where a mask is put on, a play. And the idea would be, who's around in the summer that can dress up to be in this play? As it progresses, it enters Gloucester in 1909 with Eric Pape, who is the producer at Stage Fort Park
Ah,
of Percy McKay's play.
yes.
At Stage Fort Park, there are over 20,000 people in attendance in the audience. They built huge, it's in the Gloucester Times Online, huge wooden benches for people to sit on. Okay? It's a huge, there are 1,500 people in the cast.
No, I'm just blown away by
Yeah.
these wonderful numbers.
They are extraordinary
50
numbers.
If I put on a 1,500 member cast, I would
Yeah.
expect the audience would be 100 people. But
I know. Yeah. So,
more,
but
more people in the cast.
I'm not that got to the best part.
1,500 people, and the audience, there's a capacity for it, and they fill
20,000 people.
20,000. And now remember, even in 1900, Gloucester's population, Gloucester alone,
Okay.
not Rockport as well, but was a little over 20,000.
Yeah.
It seems like every man, woman, and child
Okay.
in the vicinity came
And so
to
this
see
is the height
event.
of fishing. We can agree to
Yeah,
that?
okay.
What do you think the play is?
Oh, it's got to be about fishing.
No, Percy McKay puts on a translation of the Canterbury Pilgrim. Okay. And he has the Charles,
But it's a big draw.
it's a big draw. Well, it's also Gloucester Days too. It's the Gloucester Day. It's a
Okay.
big event. And Pape has already dedicated the tablet on State Fort Park.
Oh.
He's a big time being. So out of that comes a real interest in outdoor theater on Cape Ann. And Rockport in 1914 has Virginia Tanner, who graduated from Radcliffe. And at that time, women could artistically express themselves by being choreographers. And she puts on a Rockport mask at the hospital in Rockport. It's a combination of summer people and people who live in the town. And a mask had a very strict formula. It was New England, it was Native Americans, nature being subjugated to the whims of the white man. That was what that for. However, what I discovered last year is it spread into Lanesville as well. Charles Grafley, who lived up on Woodbury Street, his daughter Dorothy, played with kids, as all kids did. I mean, everyone played. I grew up, I lived in practically ate dirt. Right? By the time she's a teenager, is putting on outdoor masks behind the house in a wood-seated amphitheater with the trees, with lighting and sets by her father.
This is like in or around Woodbury Street?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grafley lived right on the corner. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. And the first one that I found record of was in 1915, where they're doing a fundraiser for the families of soldiers fighting in the U.S.-Mexican War, and they're collecting silver.
Yes, yes.
Okay. She goes on to Wellesley, and in 1920, 22, she does another mask, another play, where for the first time, and I mean, for the one 1915, 250 people come to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I mean, think of it. No radio, right?
Yeah.
It's radio.
Yeah.
It's newspapers. 1920s, she's doing a fundraiser for Wellesley College in Lanesville of outdoor theater. You know, so this is a whole side of how theater moves through. Look, I want to bring it back to Dogtown for 1 second.
Yes.
There's nothing there, right? So if a storm comes up in Lanesville or in Ipswich Bay, it blows across the Cape down into Gloucester Harbor.
Sure.
And it rips the sails, it knocks the windows apart.
Right.
And this great poet named Madison Julius Cowain, who was from Kentucky, known as the Keats of Kentucky, he wrote poems nonstop. In the time we've been, he would have written 20 poems. He came up and stayed in Annisquam. He went into Dogtown. He was blown away. And he writes a poem called Gammer Gaffer. Now, Gammer Gaffer, he puts it in the construct of a witch getting on a broomstick, flying out of Dogtown and going down and doing everything. Okay? What it really is, or could be, you could say, another is, it's a nor'easter. It's another way of talking about a nor'easter gathering storm across the Cape.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, again, this is the artists and the poets and people who are creative coming to Gloucester.
It is.
Often from out of town, out of state. And they're developing something, they're inspired by what they see.
You know, I lament, I remember when Joe Garland died.
Yes.
And I felt that's the end of a type of history. Mm-hmm. You know, my friends then, I knew Stephanie Buck, I knew Fred Buck, I know Fred Bowden. Mm-hmm. I know people now, you know. But having come from this background where my father built a house, okay, and feeling what is it to have growing up aware of loss while one is living it, I just find it necessary to present things as simply as I can. Sure, we can all find rabbit holes to go down. We need to bring our rabbit holes up to the level where people will say, let me think about that.
Yeah. We've got just a few more minutes, 5 minutes or so, to develop from your, you've talked about these things many times, different ways. You're a photographer, you've had gallery exhibits. What it is that drew you especially to memorialize, preserve what you were seeing in Cape Ann as an artist yourself?
So Epsom is inland.
Yeah.
My mom and her sisters would take us to Hampton Beach for 1 week in the summer when it was the old style little thing. When I came with my first wife to Cape Ann, I said, this is amazing. This is the ocean. It was in my 20s, walking my son, cradling him, and watching the fishing fleet go by out to George's Bank, that I said, now I understand what the word horizon means. Okay? I grew up with red pine trees that click-clack, that were of no use whatsoever except as telephone. It was, in fact, a very efficient windbreak to keep the hayfield open. So I had a hunger in this space to see how the participants, the people living here, how they look at the land. And I think it's a landscape that was given to us to be stewards of, and we've blown the money on it. Okay, we just haven't really taken care of it. Okay? I mean, there was a time, you can look at the newspapers in the late 1800s, where no one would think to come to the beach for a week. Why would you want to have a place looking out at the beach and the ocean? And the first visitors that came were ministers who came to get renewed for meditation. They were meditating to go back to the city and to the poor, to the marginalized, to the disadvantaged. So I became attracted to this landscape and the ways that we protect it and the need to protect it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well said. I have to add, these days, we've got to concern ourselves with climate change.
Sure.
And building on the very outermost of the shores is not necessarily wise, given the likelihood of higher.
When you look at the Mason map from 1831, all of Cape Ann has got sand dunes all the way around it. Like how much has been filled in here? What's been done?
I'll tell my story. Tell my story about the New Hampshire lady. This is a true story. I heard it from her. She, as a little girl, she was also from New Hampshire. She was from an area where it was in the woods, and when she was brought by her parents to Gloucester and saw for the first time the ocean and a beach, she ran to the water.
Okay.
And picked up some and tasted it.
Yeah.
And she said, "It really is salt."
Well, you know, that's a profound story. That even goes, I'll tell you, at the end of Henry Leonard's book of Pigeon Cove and its vicinity, which he writes in 1870, the story of Pigeon Cove. He talks about a Indian chief coming from the Midwest and coming to put his hand in the water.
Yes.
And taste and saying, "It is salt."
It is salt.
I was, true story, last story, in Pigeon Cove down by Cathedral Rock, sunning myself, and a Chinese man came with his mother. Mother's very, very slowly on the rocks, and she took one slipper off and put her foot in the water, then came back and left. Yeah.
She had been in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
That was enough. Yeah, delightful. This has been a delightful hour.
Thank
I
you,
know
Ray.
that people out there in the same way that I feel. It hasn't been an hour, has it been?
No, hasn't
Just
been.
a few minutes, and it was a pleasure.
Yeah.
We've learned about a lot about the history of Dogtown, but also about generically history of Cape Ann, and it is inspiring to hear you describe to us that your efforts to preserve it and encouragement to others who are out there to support and work on the same angle. I give you 30 seconds to sign off in your best way. You don't have anything to juggle.
No, I didn't. Enough's enough. There you go. You can find the key. The dog and everybody says, "Thank you very much." No. Keep watching, Wayne. Yeah.
All right, that's fun.
Good.
We'll see you next time. This was a special with Les Bartlett. I again encourage you, Mr. Cape Ann, if you have any other chances to witness and go to one of his talks, do it. It's going to be an exciting and interesting satisfaction of curiosity that you never even knew you had. Thank you very much.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neitosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien työ.